Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are just going to let everybody get into the town hall before we kick things off. So we'll be starting in just a minute. All right, Nick, if you want to go ahead and kick things off for today, that'd be great.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Nick Sargent, president of SIA. Today, we're kicking off a series of conversations on inclusion. We've all awoken to a reality we have ignored for far too long. As a very white, predominantly male-driven industry, we need to take a closer look at ourselves and what we can be doing to make this industry more welcoming and more inclusive to those who would enhance and strengthen our community. We have an amazing opportunity in front of us to affect positive change, and these town halls are geared towards opening the door to constructive dialogue and exchange. These town hall conversations are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of conversations that we need to be having in effort to create the necessary introspection that allows us all to determine where we currently are, and what we can do as individuals, as companies, and as an industry to create necessary change. We know this is not a sprint, this is a marathon, and we'll be in this race for a very, very long time. We hope you'll join us on this journey. We're going to make mistakes, but as long as our intentions are good, we support one another and we make the necessary corrections. Together, we can make a significant difference. All right. We've assembled some amazing voices that will help illuminate the meaning of inclusion through their own personal and professional stories. Before we get going, I want to share a special thanks to our series moderator, Selema Masekela. With an illustrious winter sports background, he couldn't have been the more perfect person for us to help guide this series of conversations, both sharing his own experiences as well as being a master storyteller. You may know Selema as the face of ESPN's X Games, but he has accomplished so much more. Selema is an expert commentator, journalist, host, Emmy-nominated producer, and action sports enthusiast, best known for his work across NBC, Vice, ESPN, ABC, Nat Geo, Red Bull Media House, and a lot more. He's the co-founder of Stoked Mentoring, an organization dedicated to mentoring at-risk youth through action sports. Selema also thrives as a film, TV producer, and musician. The son of South African jazz legend and activist Hugh Masekela, Selema's roots are as South African as they are New York City, as they are San Diego. Thank you, Selema, for taking part in these important conversations.
Thank you. And maybe you could just introduce me everywhere I go moving forward.
I'm going to work on that. But before I do that, I want to introduce the town hall and panelists. So today's discussion is called Listen and Learn, Stories of People of Color in the Winter Outdoor Industry. We have an incredible group of panelists. We are honored to have their participation and for sharing their knowledge with us. First up, I want to introduce Mike Carey, founder and CEO of Seirus Innovation and former NFL referee. He was the first black head referee of a Super Bowl, former SIA chairman of the board, former member of the board of trustees at Santa Clara University, and he's surrounded and supported by a wife and two powerful daughters. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Gerilyn Davis, Chief Inclusion Officer from Inclusion on the Slopes. Dr. Gerilyn took her first ski lesson, despite any beginner slopes being open, on Breckenridge, on Peak 8, where we all know is where their intermediate runs are. What she didn't want me to let everyone know that I'm going to share is that she got her instruction on the web. So thank you, Dr. Gerilyn, for sticking with it. Next, I want to introduce Michael Akira West, SIA board member, founder, CEO of 686, and USC professor. He's a lifelong snowboarder, having transitioned from skateboarding in the late 80s, and he's never looked back. This town hall will be a conversation between our panelists. However, we encourage that you submit questions, and if you have time, we'll try to answer them at the end. Please use the Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen to submit a question. So at this time, I want to welcome Selema to kick things off.
Thank you very, very much, Nick. And thank you all that have decided to tune in and join us for this town hall. When I first got the call that SIA was going to do this, I got really excited and hopeful because as we're all seeing across the landscape of many different subcultures in our country, this is a time for reflection and taking a look at what works and what doesn't, and how we can become better as a whole and as a collective by affecting the circles that we dance in. So to be able to be on this panel with such distinguished company, Mike West, a friend for over 2.5 decades, Dr. Gerilyn Davis, who I've only come to know in the last day, but I'm mind blown by, and Mike Carey, who I can't even believe I'm on the same Zoom call with, like just completely mind blown. I'm going to be trying not to fanboy this entire time. But I really wanted to open this discussion by talking about this lifestyle and what has drawn you to it, how it has helped to shape you. Because in that introduction, all you heard from Nick was the passion that holds us to this culture. So I'm going to start with the newest member of the tribe, because I think your story is so powerful and so unique, and it just smashes any ideas of stereotype and box of what participants of this culture should look like and what that path can be. So please, Dr. Davis.
Yes. So Selema, once again, thank you so much for having me, as well as SIA. To chime in on your statement about it being very organic. Yeah, so my experience, for anyone who's read any of my medium.com articles, I'm really authentic in my love for snow, beginning at a very early age when I was a little girl, and just loving snow to the point that, you know, our first snow was me running outside as a little girl with no shoes on, with nothing but a t-shirt, and just embracing the snow in such an organic way because the snow was magical to me. So of course I was reprimanded to come back in the house after I ran out. But it was just this idea of just wanting to venture out more into this industry and learn more about it. So I even asked my mother at a young age, like, I want to go skiing. What does that look like? Can I go skiing? Because I was taking piano lessons and gymnastics. And so I'm like, you know, I want to go skiing. And she informed me, she's like, we don't ski. And I'm like, what do you mean we don't ski? I'm like, let me do everything else. Why can't I ski? So I held tight to that dream. And as I got older, I knew that was something that I was really passionate about. And so about 4 years ago, I moved to Denver, Colorado to complete my doctoral program as well as to ski. And that was my intention, was to move to Colorado to ski. And so I went skiing for the first time of May of 2019. And I think Nick mentioned that I went at Breckenridge, and, initially I was a beginner skier and they didn't have any beginner slopes open. And I was very clear that I've been studying this, considering I'm very much so a researcher and a nerd. So I studied it, I researched it, I was preparing my body for it. And I'm like, I'm going skiing, whether they have beginner slopes or not. And so I went out, and, I actually just only spent like 10 minutes at the bottom of the mountain. And because I did so much research and learned so much about the culture and the dynamic of how I need to position my body and how I need to stand. And so we went up on the mountain, and it was just everything. And so by the end of my lessons, I was running past the ski instructor, like, which way do I go? And I was flying past her. So, I mean, that just re-energized my love for the sport. And also too, it just ignited that I can combine my 16 years of HR experience as well as my love for the snow. So that's really how it organically began.
That is an incredible story. And I love that you did that you pre-gamed it on YouTube.
Oh yeah, I did tons of research. 38 videos to be exact, if you want the numerical equivalent.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you feel like because you did the homework, that by the time you got to the mountain, you had some sort of familiarity, even though it was your first time?
Oh yeah. And I think that also too, my ski instructor, I was able to convey with her some of the things that I learned. And she was like, you really know the kinetics. I'm like, yeah, I've been studying it, and I've been doing squats and lunges and getting my body ready and, planks and trying to get my core together. Oh, I was well versed. And I think that that's what enhanced my experience. I mean, that's what really catapulted me into saying that, I can do this for a career. I want to do this for a career, and everyone should be open to this experience. Yeah.
Mike West.
Yes, sir.
We met in 1993 in Oceanside, California, when I was answering phones. I was the receptionist at Transworld Snowboarding Magazine.
A damn good one too, I remember.
And you were coming to, you had just recently started 686, and you were coming to do the dance, the advertiser editorial dance in the magazine. And I remember when we met, it was just a really powerful moment, because there were not very many, if any, melanated kids in our world. And you and I had an instant connection to be like, okay, I want to know you and you want to know me. What has your journey been, and what drew you to this culture?
It's interesting because, I came from when starting this thing is, I was hesitant because as a founder, you tell your story a lot, but you don't tell it in this way that, is somewhat, it's applicable, but it's somewhat emotional to tell certain things. But how I started was, I was adopted. I grew up as in a privileged area, not necessarily from a privileged family, and skateboarding was my world, meaning I read through the magazines, I checked things out. I mean, I listened to the tapes. And one day when I opened Thrasher magazine, there's a guy named Steve Cavalier, one of my heroes. He was snowboarding. I'm like, what is that? And, from skateboarding mentality, that is your world. Everything else sucks. And when I found that my hero, I wanted to check it out. So actually, growing up in LA, I went to Big Bear, and back then it was Gold Mine, before Bear Mountain. And that's when I discovered it in the late 80s. And it just changed my world, because not only was I able to do it in a spot that I was legally allowed to do it, because skateboarding back in the day, you weren't supposed to be certain places. It was out in the open, it was nature, and forever changed my life. And I eventually worked at Big Bear, becoming an instructor, where I eventually started my business in Big Bear from Los Angeles. So it's these organic ways of just being passionate about, one, heroes in the sport, as well as just, being a contributor to teaching the next generation here was my hook. And it just kind of evolved from there. There's no aspect of, I want to start a business in the industry and do that. It was just, it felt right. So, you know, and it has to feel right. That's how pretty much my journey started.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike. I love that. I love that cab was your inspiration to start snowboarding, especially since like you needed that skateboarding approval, and why not from a living legend? Like, oh, I guess snowboarding's cool now because cab's doing it.
Absolutely.
Mike Carey, I've watched you on television since I was young, and I always thought to myself, how is this dude more fit than most of the players on the field? Watching you referee, and it was always such a proud moment to see you, you know, in that position of authority, regulating games. And you've been a hero from afar for a very long time. And I only recently came into the knowledge of your extensive history in skiing and that, you know, this is your life. So please give us a little bit of insight into your story.
Well, thank you, Selema, for that very humbling introduction. On the football field, I was just having fun, and that's pretty much my desire in life, to make sure that I participate in becoming something that is more self-actualizing all the time, contribute to the society and my family and the world, but most of all, have a good time and do it as respectably as I can. So first, thank the panel for being here, and more importantly, thank you to the audience. It is an incredible gesture that you take time out of your life to really invest into searching how we can become more and better human beings towards each other. And as was mentioned earlier by Nick, this is a very privileged community. And especially when we end up on the mountain, it is probably the essence of white privilege. And I think most of us realize that the essence of it is privilege. And because of that, I think this audience has opened up themselves to say, I'm willing to explore. And it's really enlightening for all of us on the panel, because we really don't want to be sitting here inhaling our own exhaust. So how I got started is I'm from Southern California, San Diego, not far from where Selema went to high school. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to play football in the Bay Area. I went to school at University of Santa Clara, and a lot of my friends were skiing. And when football was over, because you couldn't ski during the season or while you had a scholarship, my senior year, I went on a junket with a bunch of my buddies. We went up to ski, and it was horrible. It was night skiing, and I'd never seen skis before. They said, hey, don't worry, we can do it. And so they took me to the top of the mountain. Night skiing then was just spotlights around the mountain. It was just the worst experience I could have come up with. But, you know, I spent a lot of times in the local mountains in San Diego. Good friend of my father was a mountaineer, and so we would go up, we would tromp around, we'd cut most of our own firewood ourselves, and we'd haul it down. So I really was engaged in the outdoors, and the idea of sliding down a mountain was just breathtaking. So I again went the next year. That year I went with my girlfriend at the time, now my wife Wendy, and got introduced to it the best way possible. And so then I fell in love with it, you know, mainly the outdoors and just the spirit of the community. When you're skiing, everybody's having a good time and everybody's trying to have a collective good time together. Because it is, as Selema mentioned, it is our environment. It's very easy to make it difficult for outsiders to feel welcome. I kind of crash every party I go to, so I never felt subjected to that. But I've seen it, and we've all seen it on every resort we go to, especially if you are a local at a particular resort. which we have a house in one of the resorts. And some of the language that we use, I think if we really reflected on it, we would change it immediately. Just the word beginners, novices, gapers, those kind of things that seem fun when you're in a little crowd is really, can be quite intimidating to those who are doing it for the first time. And it doesn't feel like all of the time that our arms are out welcoming those to come in and, hey, come on and have a good time. You know, maybe after hours when you're in the restaurants, that does happen, and in the bars, but I think that the whole experience of being on the mountain with 10,000 of your closest friends is an experience that can blossom into more than that. And more importantly, when we leave the mountain, we all go home to our communities. We all go home to our jobs, wherever they are. And in that environment, if we take the time for introspection and really think about how we feel about each other, and not just how we're supposed to feel about each other, but how we really feel, then some of that compassion that we would like reflected to us, we will reflect out, and that will make the very first step of inclusiveness in this industry.
Church with Mike Carey.
Your mic's off. Selema, your mic's off.
Is my mic on now?
You got it.
Okay. Thank you for that. That was so powerful. And that inclusiveness, that welcomeness in the beginning is so key. My experience, my family moved from the East Coast to Southern California to Carlsbad, not far from where Mike was. And skateboarding and surfing was what all the kids did. And there were no kids in my high school who looked like me. There were two. One ran track and one played football, and then me. And I was drawn towards the kids that skated and surfed because to me it was rhythmic. It looked like dancing, that sideways stance and being able to perform and express yourself. I was like, I'm with this. And as a B-boy growing up in New York City, it just looked like breakdancing to me. So I was drawn to it. And then 6 months later, my friends took me up to Big Bear to go snowboarding because everyone had decided that they were going to become snowboarders, to the point where I didn't have the gear, my family couldn't really afford it. So I wore a wetsuit, a body glove, full wetsuit, 3 millimeters, with a Lang bright green jacket that a friend lent me, and some horribly loud Bolet goggles. And that was my first snowboarding experience. And I almost also died from dehydration because of the wetsuit. But regardless of that fact, and the first time that I went as well, Mike, was at night, my mind was blown. That feeling of being able to harness gravity and slide and have all of the fun possible with all of these people at the same time, and everyone come down to the bottom of the mountain with the same, like, I want to do that again, was like your own self-powered sort of Six Flags experience. And from that day forward, I was a snowboarder. I was a shop rat who would go to my local snowboard ski shop, surf shop, and go in the back and learn how to tune boards, etc. And it really began a love affair for me. And, you know, that being said, I think the hardest part for me in loving this now for 32 years as a lifestyle has been the challenge to always feel like I'm kind of having to explain that this space that we are in is something that I value as mine, and that I'm not just a visitor. And I think sometimes what happens in mountain towns especially is this idea that, like, if you don't look the part, you how can you possibly be the part? Some of the hardest challenges for me are the stares that I would get and still get sometimes when I'm standing in the lift line, or those questions where someone says, "Hey, you know, it's really nice to see you out here. And to which I'd say, well, it's nice to see you out here too. And then be like, well, you don't understand. Like, it's cool that you're here because this is not what you guys do. You're different. And I still get that to this day. I still get people who ask me after 15, 20 years of broadcasting and being a voice, an expert voice in snowboarding, how it is that I learned all these things on ESPN. Like, they really must have done a good job teaching you how to explain these sports, because you don't possibly do them, do you? And people say that to me to almost to compliment me on my career, because it's impossible that this could have happened. And I feel like we do have a long way to go in making people feel that don't necessarily fit the stereotype, feel welcome. Because that first experience for marginalized people when they go for marginalized groups, when they show up to a mountain, they've made a big choice to be like, I'm going to see if I can play in this space. And I really, really hope that I'm made to feel welcome, because it all it takes is a couple of interactions that go bad for people to be like, it's not worth it for me. I see you, Dr. Davis, nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in on that as well, just because even in my first experience, it was the stairs. And luckily, I'm in HR and I've had this HR background for all this duration of time. So I'm able to engage with people in such a way where if you are staring at me, I'm going to say something to you and we're going to engage in a conversation. But not everyone is equipped with those tools. And I think that's what's that's one of the efforts with Inclusion on the Slopes, is to really develop those interpersonal skills and create that level of engagement. And even I had a gentleman who was staring at me, and I was like, okay, he's either staring at me for one of two reasons, because I am a woman of color or because I'm actually beautiful. So, I mean, there's two options there. So most of the time I'm like, okay, either way, you know, I want to talk to you. I want to get to know you. And I'm all about human connection. So for me, if I see someone, I want to connect with you. I want to know, you know, even if you are perceiving me a certain way, most likely I'm able to mitigate that perception.
I'm going to start taking that on my own feeling for myself when I'm getting stared at. I'd be like, maybe it's just because of all this.
Yeah.
How have you found those interactions when you have made the effort to engage in connection, as opposed to just like, I can't believe this person is still staring at me? What are the results of those connections?
Well, I think most often the stares are just out of curiosity. I mean, I think it's just because we are a bit of an anomaly on the mountain, and that engagement, their reaction is more so like, okay, what's going on? What's your story? You're here. And so for me, I was very adamant about conveying my story. I mean, everyone on that lift knew this was my first time. I want everyone to be well aware. And it was interesting because when I finished coming down the mountain, I actually had people cheering me on, saying, oh, you made it, because I was able to kind of create these relationships with a community that may not know me or may not be familiar with me. And so that was really cool to have that experience. But once again, that's just because of my own ability to equip myself. And I think that's, like I said, that's the mission for Inclusion on the Slopes, is really to create these interpersonal relationships and navigate that to create a win-win for both parties involved.
Mike, you've been doing this probably the longest of everyone on the panel. Where have you seen the progress, and where do you still sort of find yourself shaking your head in your experiences?
Well, I think you find both every day. And just like Dr. Davis said, if you are one of those who like to meet the world face-to-face head-on, it's a little bit easier for people like us to do that. And I think a lot of us in the snow sports are like that because you're adventurous. You have to be adventurous at some point in your psyche to want to slide down a mountain, even though people have done it before. But there are many people who are getting introduced to it, just like I was introduced to it. I had no idea about the sport. It just sounded like it'd be fun. That if they are less outgoing and a little more introverted, or just average, they can be shut off in a heartbeat. You know, just the ability for Snowsports to retain customers just because of the learning curve is really, really a very small percentage stay with it. And if you load on top of that any type of unwelcoming, whether it's subliminal or not, they're not going to go back to where they're not having a good time. So you see it all the time, but I do think just growing up in Southern California, San Diego, which is predominantly Anglo, you know, my neighborhood when I was growing up was predominantly African American, but it was a mix. So it had a mix of, we're about 60% African American, 20% Latino, 20% Caucasian, and then smattering of Asians from the Philippines and the like. And so that my neighborhood was always engaged in a larger community than one ethnic group. And so I was comfortable for a long time engaging with anybody, but most people come from a fairly melanin challenged environment, right? So it's pretty monolithic generally where you grow up, because, you know, we're tribal, so we pretty much stay close to people who are more like us. Mm-hmm. And so when you're in an environment that someone new comes in, you always are going to get that curiosity. Most of it driven by, you know, genuine, hey, what is this thing? Just like puppies run up to each other saying, hey, where are you coming from? Rarely do you get those snide or condescending personas. They're there, but generally my inclination is to say, well, thanks, nice talking to you, see you later. Because I've learned that although most of us have a lot in common, more in common than things that are not in common, there are some people who have a wall put up that I don't have the skill set to help to erode, but most people do. And that's just been my navigation tool for my entire life. And I think if you genuinely like people, care for people, it's going to come through and give it just like anything else. You give respect, you get respect back. You give warmth out, you're going to get warmth back. And that's where progress shows. Mm.
The old, be blessed, I do not have the time, works very well. There is something to be said, though, of, I'm going to speak for myself and ask the rest of the group. There are things for me where having to sort of navigate what type of energy people are giving me on a regular basis in those spaces when I'm on the mountain or in mountain towns, it can be a bit exhausting, just because when you're just trying to enjoy your experience and wondering whether or not you're being welcomed. Many times people treat me differently once they find out what my career is, or that I came from X Games, etc., or they recognize me. The whole sort of energy would shift, but it can be a bit exhausting when you are just trying to do the same thing as everyone else, which is go out and have the best time possible. Mike, I want to ask you what some of the challenges have been for you as one of the few minorities who is a CEO running a business in this space. What are some of the challenges and some of the areas that you see within the culture for growth?
You got two CEOs.
I'm sorry, Mike. My bad. Mike West. Mike and Mike.
I've known Mike Carey for a while too. And, you know, we run independent businesses, right? So I think, you know, the challenges associated with just running a business is phenomenal. You know, there's no shortage of that too, you know, but, you know, I think respective to what we have here too is, I think in Selema, you and I talked about, like, you know, we're a company of, we started in action sports, you know, and we came from the epitome of us versus them, you know, us meaning snowboarders, them meaning skiers, right? Anyone that looked different than us, anyone that dressed different than us, anyone that acted different than us, they weren't from us. Now, it's a completely different world here, you know, and, you know, during the process, we realized that we are definitely part of the problem of really alienating a lot, not necessarily as future consumers, because, you know, like people you alienate, people of color, are not necessarily a business opportunity. And it's more just the aspect of understanding, you know, their story and where they're from, and being from, you know, we're located in Compton. Our offices are in Compton. You know, I live 5 miles west in Manhattan Beach, one of the wealthiest kind of neighborhoods in America. And there's such a great divide, but our aspect is very different. Like Mike said, is I go to the mountains here too. It's pretty diverse, right? So, you know, that's our mix. When I go somewhere like, you know, the Midwest, or I go to Europe, it's completely different, you know? So, you know, I think that we speak authentically in terms of what we're about, what we're from. So the challenges for us are not necessarily divided by, you know, the color of our skin versus, you know, the other challenges of just the equal opportunity of just access to the areas, you know? So it's just related to that, but there's a huge amount of challenges running a small business here. But I think coming back to this is how we started is I got the big old hand from team sports, where team sports to me were quite different, where when they first told me like, hey, you know, you can't be on my team because you're not like us. And that's the first time I realized, what does us mean? I want to be like us. I want to be like you guys. As a kid, that is pretty powerful to go, whoa, and that affected my life throughout growing up, to the point that, you know, being independent, just like Carey is, like, it's maybe the antithesis of being like us. Is I didn't want to be like the majority. I wanted to do things our way. We can have our voice. So that is maybe some of the silver linings in terms of trying not to be like us, you know, but it's been, you know, it's all individually different.
Dr. Davis, I think since you're such a research-driven person and you a self-admitted card-carrying super nerd, what have you learned about the landscape in the last year that you've fallen in love with, and then been like, okay, I'm deep diving this as hard as I can? I read your post about the first time that you went to the Outdoor Retailer show, etc. What are you learning? What are you seeing? And where do the opportunities lie in this conversation?
Well, I think the biggest opportunities that I am witnessing is that people want to get out to the mountain. They want to have these experiences. And a large bulk of their resistance is, how do I do it? Who are my partners? How am I able to navigate that landscape? And the intention, like I said, with the information that I'm putting out, is really to raise that awareness and bridge that gap for people. And in addition to the organizations that are wanting to be more inclusive, I think I may have mentioned to Nick on a call that we had not too long ago that inclusion really is the only way. And the reason why I believe this is just because when you have this inclusive mentality, abundance is readily available for you as far as like decision making and being able to really access tools. And so part of that is is instead of concentrating so much on getting the people to the mountain, I'm attempting to focus on bringing the mountain to the people. And so helping them understand those lived experiences. And most of my medium.com articles do emphasize those stories, like, you know, Inclusion on the Slopes, the story of Jen, who was a Thailand woman who came to UC Boulder and just began going skiing because it was just something that she wanted to do. So there's a desire out there for the masses. And I think there's a great opportunity for organizations to really tap into that customer base. But if you don't speak their language and if you don't connect to the customer, then it does appear to be unreachable. So based upon my research, there's most definitely room for opportunities.
To that point, there was a question that someone's asked within the group that is interesting, asking how to make people of color, people from other groups feel more welcome on the mountain without being overly such, without looking like they're pandering, etc. How how do these doors get opened for inclusion, making sure that if it looks like someone, maybe this is their first time, making them feel more welcome while also not being condescending?
Well, I think the first step is to assess what their needs are. I mean, just making the assumption that you're a beginner, so there's certain things that I need to do for you because you're a beginner that may not fit their actual needs. I mean, even for myself, I mean, they were intending when I began to, you know, we're going to stay at the bottom. I'm like, no, take me up. Like, I didn't come here to stay at the bottom, and I've done enough research, and it was a little bit of trial and error to figure out where my skill set was. But I think part of that is being able to convey a confidence and to distribute that confidence to those who are beginners to help them feel empowered to be able to get on the mountain. And then also to equip the organizations that are attempting to create this inclusion with the skill set to be able to navigate and gain a pulse of their actual audience. So it's very important for organizations to take that perspective.
In the conversations that I've been having in the last few weeks, in the wake of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, as we are sitting in a really big awareness about race in America, and how now, for the first time ever, within the totality of corporate culture, there is this acceptance of responsibility in these corporations and these brands being a part of dictating what culture looks like and realizing like, oh, we have work to do now on the inside. You have two different schools. You have the people who are like, okay, this is a hot topic right now. How do we say a couple of things, do a couple of things, and fix it so that we don't get a stare at us? And then you have the other brands who are realizing, okay, bigger than this. This is about changing brand culture, but how do we do that? What are the things within both of your brands, Mike Carey and Mike West, that you do within your brands to build this type of culture?
Well, I'll start on this one because I think this is the topic that really, I hope we're broadening all of our vision, that this is not just what we are doing to help the snow sports industry reach more people, because we can do that as individuals. I think most of us got on the mountain because somebody reached out and said, hey, come try this. And more of that needs to happen for our sports culture. But for the broader culture of America and the world, we have to do that from our hearts with everyone else in everywhere we go. And because there are a lot of pockets of tribes, it's easy for any business to say, well, you know what, I'm just not getting those people coming towards me. And that's true. It won't happen unless you go out and reach a hand out and bring someone in and bring enough in so that there is a comfort zone of people who have different anything from you. And our culture at Seirus is what we try to form is that everybody here is coming in to join in a team that helps each other, and that we need people who have diverse thoughts, that if everybody thought the same way, we would not change ever. We would just keep doing the same thing that we did when we started. And our whole idea is creativity, and it's hard to create without diverse input and dissenting input. And we have a lot of challenging meetings because there are a lot of people who are empowered to disagree. And if you're empowered to disagree and always believing that when it's all over, whatever we have all put in the pot together, we all own, and that's what we're going to take out to the broader world, that's helped with our culture immensely. And we have just an incredible group of people who embrace that. And it all starts, as I mentioned earlier, about looking inside yourself and say, what do you really want to be? And let that out and welcome other people to show what they are and really absorb what they're saying, not holding your tape recorder going while you're waiting to say what you're going to say. And that's a challenging skill set, because it's, you know, all of us loves me some me, right? And so if you realize that, and we like ourselves, and we like the closest thing to us, and so if you say, those who are not closest to me, I am going to work extra hard to absorb what's saying, then you have a fighting chance. And so that's what we try to foster inside our business and every relationship that we have. I mean, it's not easy. Don't flick a switch, but
you know, Selema, you know, like we're brand ambassadors. We're in the branding business. We don't produce widgets, right? We do something that we passionately love to do, share it with folks that equally do the same. You know, we're here for self-improvement. I think that as brand people here too, you know, we're protectors, and we need to, it's our responsibility to get others, or just have other people at the table too, you know, and that's part of the problem here is, you know, if we go, hey, well, I look at the best qualified person here, and that's how I make my decisions, you know, and yeah, you can say that too, but that is definitely, obviously it's not getting us to where we need to get. So we need to do the extra work and look at those areas, discover those areas that potentially expands that pool, right? And I think it's our responsibility to do that. And it does take work. It does take education, and it does take collaboration, you know, like, and I think that we realize, and hopefully everyone realizes, you can't do this by yourself, and you shouldn't, you know. We have spoken to more brands, more ambassadors, more people outside the industry more than ever. And I think just like you approach a collaboration with a product here, you approach it with a partnership, with an association, right? To educate that so you can work together. We have an equity action pledge here that we publish here, and that's our commitment to make these adjustments, to make these investments. And it's something that, you know, it may not sit well with everyone, but I think that one of the things that we realize is just being on the sidelines and being silent, and maybe working at stereotypes of we're the silent Asian kind of male type of guy, that's not acceptable, you know? And I think that that is the first step that I think we are trying to do, that if anyone we talk to, it's just taking those steps and just taking those investments. And this is not a trend setting type of thing. This is the right thing to do.
Yeah. I've been having these conversations with a few different brands, and it's been for me saying to people, hey, you don't have to reinvent your brand. The reason why you're successful is because you have some really great things about your brand culture that have been working for you. How do you take those things and those tools that you have to take those same ideals within your brand culture and apply them to what your social responsibility is, or apply them to the manner in which you diversify the landscape of that hiring pool to get the best people? That takes effort. It takes going out of your comfort zone to find, but to my Carey's point, what you gain in being able to expand the voices and expand that landscape is how we trickle down and grow something that creates a landscape that 10 years from now, you can sit back and go, wow, that's what happened from this. I think oftentimes people get very intimidated that all of a sudden they have to reinvent the wheel and how they do things when they actually already have those tools, Dr. Davis. And it's about how do I apply what I already have?
Yeah, I think you're dead on as far as using those tools that you already have. And I think what's so essential when it comes to creating this inclusive environment within your organization is to leverage your strengths and what you do well. I mean, that's what got you to where you are, to be able to navigate those things that are unknown and navigate the uncertainty. I think we're experiencing right now in COVID-19 that no longer are what affects another affects us all. So it's this frame of thought that we have to challenge and be willing to challenge ourselves on. And that really ties into the systematic thinking that created the origin of the system that we're trying to quote unquote dismantle or attempting to challenge. So that's an iterative process. So you ground yourself in your strengths and your abilities and what you do well, and you start just taking action items step by step. I mean, it's iterative. You consistently are challenging your frame of thought, but you're grounded and you know who you are. I think Carey said it best about knowing yourself and knowing your heart. And so therefore it allows you to handle the turbulence. You know, you're able to navigate that a little bit better because you're like, you know what? I know that I'm resilient, but this is going to be a challenge. And so you dig deeper, and that allows you to create some action steps and start really taking a moment back and practice some emotional intelligence. How do I feel about taking this act? Why do I feel a little bit uncomfortable with expanding my frame of thought, or, you know, bringing on others who do have different viewpoints? What is my emotional trigger that I'm experiencing in this moment, and how do I navigate that from a safe place?
Yeah, so Dr. Davis, she brought up a point that this is a rare opportunity for us in the world, not only in the US. You know, what we have going on now about Black Lives Matter is a much more expansive challenge than that, because if we're just talking about Black Lives Matter, we're way behind the curve. It's what's the quality of Black lives that really matter. And we are in America so easily distracted from really the essence of Black Americans' experience, that if you are not immersed in it, the prevailing thought is, well, there's really not that much of a problem. Look, we've got all these laws and everything, and everybody's got an equal footing. But there's so many things that you can educate yourself on, books, articles. If the audience does one thing, go back 1 or 2 weeks, go to the New York Times article about by Nicole Hannah Jones. Read that article. It's one of the most condensed openings of vision that America can ever read. I think it was last week.
June 26th, to be precise.
Read that. But what my main point is that the other opportunity is the horrors of this pandemic has made an opportunity for us that this species has not felt in 100 years. Yeah. That at the same time, the species is under attack by an alien, not from outer space, but, well, obviously from outer space, but that is here live right now. And we are probably more connected than we've ever been. You just think about walking around your neighborhoods now. We all walk on our neighborhoods right now. Everybody, not just 1 in 30, waves, says hi. And that is giving us an opportunity to see how well connected we are. And that should not be limited just to those in our neighborhood. Take that out, and I think that's a huge step in the right direction.
Someone asked a question that was beautifully shared from all of you. Someone asked a question about the importance of for Black people and for other groups to see someone that looks like them in the mountain experience in jobs. For instance, ski or snowboard instructors, ski patrol, management, etc. You know, I remember the first time that I saw a Black ski patroller, like I chased the dude down, and it was in Mammoth, like maybe 15 years ago. And I wanted to know his entire story. Cause like, he wasn't just a visitor. I was like, this is a real life Black mountain man. Like he lives this. And it was so empowering for me, out of this idea of like a Black monolith of what our lives are supposed to look like. And that sense of ownership of these spaces. How do you think how do I phrase this? I feel like there's a real opportunity for, within mountain businesses specifically, to expand their outreach of what it can look like to offer that life. Because what comes with the job is lifestyle. And it's very, very appealing, where if people knew that they had that opportunity, they would clamor to be like, I would love a shot at that. So how do we think, what are some of the ways in which, I guess, those could become more common possibilities?
I'll take that. So I have friends who are ski instructors, and they're Black ski instructors. And and it goes back to what Mike West said a little bit ago, is that we all believe that our intuition is flawless. It's just part of our nature, right? But intuition is probably the weakest thing that we have in our experiences. And so what happens with intuition is that all those subliminal biases that you have, they come out when you say, I'm going to pick the best person for this job. And if we can re-examine that, because generally what we pick as the best person for that job is a prototypical image that you already have in your mind. And if you can just work on throwing that out and listen intently to the possibilities that not just the words say when you're interviewing somebody, but the unspoken words that come through if you just pay attention to where the potential is with whoever you're trying to engage with. And I think knowing in the beginning that your first move towards, I want to have this person join, is probably driven by your biases stronger than anything else. Mm-hmm. So what we always like to say is, you know what, let's just take some time and deconstruct why that decision came, and then put it back together with all the outside information that you've gathered in the near and distant future, then make that decision. And generally it makes a better decision.
I know that if people did not take that approach with me from the very beginning of my career, especially as I was making my transition in television, that I wouldn't be sitting here on this Zoom call. Yeah. I did not go to college. I do not have a communications or broadcasting degree or any certification that says I deserve to hold a microphone in my hand. But what I had was a relentless passion for the thing, and I couldn't stop talking about it. And if someone asked me to put something into perspective of a maneuver that someone had just did, I had the ability to just, I could go off and freestyle about it for miles because I was excited. Someone saw that in me and said, I think we can convert that into teaching him the actual textual professional skills to make him a broadcaster and a journalist. And I had a particular executive at ESPN who fought for me tooth and nail when people at the network tried to get me fired many times because I did not have the skill set that everyone else did on paper. So it was, in the beginning, was very frustrating to work with me because I wasn't very good. I wasn't technically good. But when I hit home runs. And I'm so grateful that people like that blocked for me and believed and held the door open for me, and that I was able to pay back on their investment. And I think to your point, Mike, that's how people can look at hiring as a whole is really getting, does this person actually perhaps have more feel for this than any piece of paper might show?
Yeah, back to my friends who are ski instructors, where their comment to me was that, yes, they've been included in the instruction program, but the clients that they're exposed to is a very, very limited, narrow band of people that, and these guys are awesome instructors, awesome people. I mean, there's nothing in their whole persona that should limit them from being with anyone, but they don't get the stars, they don't get the big money, they get just this kind of little narrow group of people that, and I don't think any of that's done with malice. I just think it's all done because, oh, this is the profile that I think this person should be. And if you don't re-examine that, sit back and say, what am I doing? That's going to proliferate, and we want to open up new horizons for the way we think about how we distribute workload. And you know, you're a perfect example. You had somebody who championed you not, you would be on the other side of this camera.
Yeah, who knows what I'd be doing.
We're all fortunate to be, even though we have our own businesses, very easily doors could have been shut and nothing got off the ground. You know,
yeah.
One of my first things was Dave Gorsuch, one of our first product. He said, "I'm gonna plaster this everywhere," and then the community kind of gave in, and as well as the boot and binding companies endorsed our product, and that gave us entree. And without that, I'd still be sitting outside watching.
As we start to wind this conversation down, somehow or another, we have flown by in almost an hour, and I'm sure we could go another. 10 years from now, as I said a little bit earlier, from each of you, what would you love to see? Where would you like to see this conversation? How would you like to envision what the landscape looks like that emerges out of this time?
You know, like I think it shouldn't be that difficult. You know, it should be second nature, and I think that the sport itself, or the landscape, it's very opening. It's very. You know, I live for solace during this point in terms of when we started. So it should become natural. And I think that this is such a welcoming area too, that it shouldn't be a topic as much, you know? And I think that we're going to take these steps to make that a reality much sooner than later.
Dr. Davis?
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of what Mike West mentioned as far as the vision that I have, even for inclusion on the slopes, is for everyone to be open to the ski experience. And so part of that is just seeing this massive, diverse group of people coming down the mountain. And it warmed your soul to know that that's how we're supposed to be. This connection, this human connection that we were always intended to have, and really debunk the myth that we don't need each other, because we do. And in addition to that, I strongly believe in this concept of just really evolving from this unconscious bias and getting into conscious thought and reflection and channeling all that feeling. If you are feeling frustrated about where the current climate is, channel that energy and allow it to guide you into something beautiful, because that's what I see for inclusion on the slope. So I just see this massive array of people from all walks of life and all backgrounds, and that's my vision.
Mike, Carey?
Yeah, I second both of those points. And again, Mike West's point about, we had a huge schism between riders and skiers in the early 80s through the 90s. And what happened there to make this a much more homogeneous outside sliding arena is that because you bump into somebody and you find out, hey, you get to know somebody, and we have a lot more things in common than not. So it's really about rubbing shoulders, engaging with anybody, everybody, because when we're out on the mountain, everybody's having a good time. Share the good times, and we'll all get close.
I will end with saying that I would just like it to in the same vein as everyone else described, I want it to not be recognizable just by gaze, whether or not somebody participates in this lifestyle or culture. I would love it to get to the point where, someone from as far-flung or diverse in origin says that they're a skier or snowboarder or a deep participant in these outdoor lifestyle sports, and no one blinks an eye. No one's unsurprised. No one's surprised. They just would like to know more about you and what that means to you. And I feel like within this conversation, I've learned a lot from everyone's personal texture of their stories, and I'm really grateful to have been able to have this discussion with all of you, and grateful to the audience for listening, and those of you that submitted some questions, and hopefully there's some takeaway from this as not being a chore that needs to be done. But really, to the point of what Mike Carey was saying, that this is and Dr. Davis, that this is a need. This is something that we collectively need to be better as a whole. And in turn, we will all, I think, benefit in ways that maybe we don't really comprehend. So thank you very much, Nick, for hosting us and letting us play here.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for joining. And just a huge thank you, Selema and the guests. You know, this is such a wonderful conversation, long overdue. And I really want to thank the industry for showing up and taking part in such an important conversation today. So thank you so much. We had a ton of great questions. We appreciate all those questions. We'll answer every one of those, but most importantly, we're going to use a lot of these questions to be included in our future events. And you can find a recording of today's town hall. Will be on SIA's website, if not end of day today, beginning of day tomorrow. So please check back and you can enjoy all that happened today. Before we sign off, I just want to say our next town hall is in 2 weeks, and it is titled Inclusion in Your Business. And that will be moderated by Selema as well. But we're going to feature Donna Carpenter from Burton Snowsports, one of my favorites. Libra Clemens, DEI consultant and former head of diversity and inclusion at PayPal. And Harvey Floyd, University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School ex-ed lecturer and strategic advisor. That one's going to be an amazing town hall, and I strongly urge you to attend. And lastly, just a huge thanks to the industry. We're just tipping the iceberg here, and we're going to get moving and make this continue for a very long time. So thank you very much. Stay healthy and have a great day. And we look forward to hearing from you in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you.